We are joined now in studio by Megan Nolan. Good morning, Megan.
Morning.
Thanks very much for coming in this morning.
Lovely to be here. Thanks for having me.
I was just saying, I'd say you never thought you'd be on Déise Today, did you?
No, never in my wildest dreams.
When you were a young one growing up now in Waterford, was Déise Today, was Willie McCarthy?
Yeah.
Were the lads, Daddy had listened to it?
Oh yeah, absolutely, yeah. It was always on the car on the way to school, yeah.
Was it?
Yeah.
What do you remember about it?
I just remember Billy being hilarious, really. Yeah, I really loved his voice and the way he spoke. I loved him.
Yeah. You are a writer. You are currently based in London.
Yeah.
And you're going to be moving to Margate, you're telling me?
That's right, yeah. I'm heading off for a while at least. I'm going to try out living by the sea and see how that suits me.
Oh, lovely.
Yeah.
And you could be walking along with one of these Zimmer frames in years to come, one of these old people as you go along, and taking in the Margate air. And tell us, how old are you?
I'm 28, nearly just turning 29 in 2 weeks' time now.
When did you leave Waterford?
I left just after school, so when I was 18 I moved to Dublin and I stayed there until I was 24 then, and then I moved to London.
Why did you leave Waterford?
I just left for college like everyone else really, but I dropped out of college, so I ended up just working in Dublin for most of the time that I was there.
You have become quite famous.
Oh God, I wouldn't say that.
I know you're a modest person, but you've become quite famous. You've written for, tell me about the publications you've written for.
So the ones I do most regularly, I have a column in the New Statesman. That's my kind of fortnightly one. Apart from that, I write for Vice and the New York Times and the Guardian. I do some interviews for the Observer magazine and a few other bits, but they're the kind of most regular ones.
How did you get into writing for the New York Times?
So when I moved to London, I was just doing office jobs, just temping and doing odd bits and pieces and some waitressing and things like that. And in my spare time, I'd always been writing, but in my spare time I started trying to pitch some articles to the Guardian was the first kind of big one that I got, and I just kind of knew that they had a pretty open door policy for comment pieces, so I pitched them a thing and they took it luckily, and then sort of just from there. But I was doing it in my spare time for a good solid year before I made enough money to stop doing my other work.
A lot of the things that you've written about are deeply personal.
Mm-hmm.
You write about being raped as a student, you write about backing sexual consent lessons, you write about an abortion you had.
Mm-hmm.
Is the essence of your writing to encapsulate those personal experiences and try to give a worldview about them? Or how do you combine those experiences with what's out there?
Yeah, I suppose when I started writing, before I was doing it professionally, I was mainly writing personal essays that were kind of entirely personal and not really concerned with politics or the outside world. It was just me trying to get some thoughts about my own experiences down. And then as I got a bit older, I started to, as you're saying, include a sort of perspective about what's going on in the world with my own experience of it. So that consent lessons one would be an example of that, I guess, because I had my own experience to kind of inform my political view on it.
Does every writer have to start with their own personal experiences?
I don't think so, no. I think that I think of myself as a sort of observational writer rather than a sort of creation. More, some people have huge imaginations and they can create things. So I kind of see myself more as observing things and then trying to make something out of those observations.
So is it possible for a non-gay person to write a gay novel? Is it possible for a non-nationalist to write about the suffering of nationalists in Northern Ireland? Or
I think so, yeah. I think obviously it's quite a hot topic at the moment with people talking about, like the John Boyne controversy of the transgender novel he wrote. I don't think that anyone, I wouldn't agree that you can't write your own experience. I think it's absolutely fine to write characters that aren't informed by yourself, but I do understand entirely why someone would be upset by feeling misrepresented by that. I think that it's, as with everything, if you do a good, informed, sensitive job of it, it will be a great novel, and if you don't, then it won't be a great novel.
Has your view of life been formed by your personal experiences?
Yes, definitely, yeah.
How much so?
So how I perceive the world, how much has that been? I suppose someone wrote me a nice email recently about a piece that I wrote that said every bit of suffering that you experience makes you valuable to another person. I think that's really true. I think that things that I've gone through have made me feel empathy to not just other people who've suffered the same things, but it makes you more open to other people's suffering in general. I suppose that's one of the positive things I've tried to take away from bad experiences I've had.
Stay with us, because I want to ask if you like James Joyce.
Okay.
Déise Today with Damien Tiernan on WLR.
With thanks to Mulligan's. Did you know you can collect your Blue Club points online? See mulliganspharmacy.com.
You got that power over me.
Déise Today with Damien Tiernan on WLR.
With thanks to mulliganspharmacy.com. Life's a beach with Mulligan's Pharmacies. Open late on the Dunmore Road and in Tremore.
Now, welcome back to the programme. You're listening to Megan Nolan. She's a Waterford-born writer, currently based in Britain. She writes for The New Statesman, The Guardian, The New York Times, The Sunday Times. And she's recently wrote a lovely piece, a homecoming piece, about how she feels about returning to Waterford on visits. And her dad is well-known playwright Jim Nolan. So the writing comes from your mother. Is that right, Megan?
Yeah, entirely, yeah.
Totally, yeah, absolutely. No. Jim was like no influence whatsoever in your life.
No, he wouldn't even let me read a book.
Nah, he's right. He spends too much time, I'd say, trying to clear the glue from the pig's trotters from his eyes, does he?
Yeah, that's mainly what he spends his evenings doing, yeah.
Every time he walks past, where is it? Which is one of the butchers?
Now. It's the one near Jeff's.
One of the butchers near, yeah. Every time he walks past it, right, he says to you, "Did I ever tell you, Megan, about the time?" So you've listened to this story 50 times.
Yeah, I'm sure he'll be annoyed with me now for making him sound like an old
times.
man. But
well, sure, he's getting on. He looks well, though. He's doing his walks
great,
out on the beach and out in Bunman or wherever it is he goes, the Copper Coast. So
he does the Greenway. Yeah.
He reminds you of a time that they were coming home late one night, himself and his friend, and they went in. They got some pig's trotters. Is that it? And they brought them home to suck on them at night.
That's right, yeah. And then the next morning he woke up and thought he had gone blind because it turned out he couldn't open his eyes because the grease from the pig trotters had crusted over after he'd touched them and he was going to sleep. So he thought he had gone blind, but it was just the pig trotter grease.
So he had rubbed his eyes obviously in the night and half cut and rubbed the eyes and the grease from and he woke up, I'm blind, oh jeez.
Yeah, he'll be delighted now that I've gone into detail on that.
It's a great little story. James Joyce, Portrait of an Artist. At the end of Portrait of an Artist, he writes about having to leave the home, having to go away and fly away to become not only a fuller, rounded person, but a better writer.
Yeah.
Is that you?
I feel a bit careful about saying that everyone has to do that because I think it's a bit patronising to anyone who chooses to stay in their hometown to say, oh, you definitely have to go away. I've personally wanted to quite badly to leave and to go and do different things and visit different places. So for me it was important, but I wouldn't say it's a necessity for everyone. Yeah.
Back slightly from the microphone a little bit, it's okay. It's not a necessity for everyone. Michael Longley and different poets and other people would spend their entire life tilling a bit of land and finding the glory in the banal and Patrick Kavanagh having left Monaghan and finding the beauty in a canal in stilly water. Combining those experiences that you have at home with those that you're learning abroad now, and that you're back here now for a week.
For a week, yeah.
You write about, can you see yourself coming back to Waterford, and that relationship that a person has when they leave their homestead. It's a very complex relationship. Yeah.
Yeah, I feel like whenever I come back, I really feel strongly that I could be here. I could stay, you know. I really love Waterford, and every time I come home, I feel sad that I don't live here, really. But
do you really believe that at this stage in your life? Because if you believe that, you would come home.
No, absolutely. That's why I don't come home. That's why I don't live here, you know. Because I know whenever I leave again, when I go back to London or wherever I'm living at the time, I feel perfectly fine and satisfied to not be here and that I'm doing the right thing with my life. But when I come back, it is just for that week or whatever, I feel very sad and not sad, but I feel...
That word sadness is important because children of all ages experience that, and parents of all ages experience that, because when a child leaves the house, firstly, they might go and live in the city, but when they go abroad, that effect that it has on those lives.
Yeah. My mum and myself were just talking about this last night, because I've never been that far away. I've usually been just in the UK or not, in Europe. But we were chatting about when my two brothers went to Australia for, a year or two at a time each. And she was saying she was terrified that they'd fall in love when they were there because it's just so far, So I think that she's relieved that we all kind of came back eventually. But I think, it's a hard dynamic to have to watch someone you love go away and not know if they'll come back at the end.
Because a child can feel guilty, a young person can feel guilty by falling in love with somebody in Australia or Canada, and the mammy and daddy feel sad.
Yeah, absolutely, yeah. I would find it very hard to live far away from my parents. I wouldn't, for instance, I kind of in the back of my head would love to live in New York someday, for instance, but I kind of wouldn't, I don't feel that I'd be able to do it now for some reason, to be that far away from my parents. And
yet if you lived at home, you might be killing each other.
I'm sure we would, yeah. Yeah, I have a great relationship with my parents now that I don't live with them.
You might be eating pig's trotters once a week. Did you ever have the pig's trotters?
No, never, no.
Oh, no, I've never had them either, no. We might do a live reading here someday. Do you know what you do? Next time you're doing a reading of one of your pieces, suck on a pig's trotter beforehand and see how it goes. You're heading to Greece for a month.
That's right, yeah.
Where are you going?
I'm going to Athens, and I'll go to Hydra, the island, for about a week of that as well.
Why?
I have a sort of relationship with the place now, because about 3 years ago I started writing my book, and I got a little grant from the Ted and Mary Foundation here, and it was enough. In London it would have only lasted me a short amount of time, and so I decided to go somewhere cheap and that I could get cheap rent for a few months and make it last as well as I could. And I happened to know a friend of a friend in Greece who had an apartment there, so I was there for about four months in 2016, and I've kind of gone back every year since then. I really love it there, and I like to spend some time on my own away from London.
Why do you write?
I think that when I was younger, because I've always written something, it's not always been the kinds of things that I write now. I used to write poetry. That was my main thing when I was younger. And I think why I ever started writing anything was that I it's a way to make sense of what's happening to you in your life, some way to put shape or a narrative on the experiences you're having. But also I think I suffered a lot with very low self-esteem when I was little, and even as an adult, but it was sort of a way to feel useful, or that you were making something that made you a valuable, that was a kind of way to tell yourself you've made something today, even if it wasn't great, at least you've produced something.
Why do we have to try and make sense of the world?
Because it's very overwhelming. Even if you have a very simple and boring life, even the most basic things, to me anyway, are very overwhelming a lot of the time. Just basic emotions and relationships you have with your family and your partner or your work, anything like that. To me, I find it hard to, even if I'm in a calm period of my life, I feel very overwhelmed by feelings a lot of the time. Even though that sounds very teenage to say that, but it does, it makes me it makes me feel better to try and outline some of these things as best I can in writing.
What do you think of death?
I don't feel terribly afraid of death, of my own death. I'm really afraid of people I love dying, and I have been lucky enough that not many people I know. I had one close friend who died when I was about 22. Apart from him, I don't really know many people who've died, and I'm really afraid of my parents dying, And that's part of why I think my dynamic with Waterford is quite painful, is that I'm very aware of the passing of time, and if I'm away for a long time, I don't come and visit, then I'm aware that that's the bones of a year gone then,
because time is precious.
Yeah, and I am very aware of how my dad said to me once when he was dropping me to the airport or something to go back to London, he said, he wasn't even upset saying this, but he said, it's actually very short, the amount of time we'll spend together cumulatively, when you think about you only coming home at Christmas for a few weeks, the amount of time that we'll have together for the rest of my life is not loads. It's, hopefully there's many more years of it, but even then, because if you're only home for 3 weeks of the year, it's not a lot of actual time together,
I wish we had more time to talk.
Yeah.
Will you come back and talk to us again, please?
Yeah, absolutely, yeah.
Do. Give us a bit more time the next time. Say hello to Mum and Dad for us.
I will.
And mind those pig's trotters.
I will, yeah.